started. As I said previously, my name is Heather Hawkins. I'm the assistant principal at Enosburg Middle School. You're first going to hear from Matthew Webb, who is the principal of Enosburg Falls Middle and High School, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the middle school.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Webb. I'm the principal of Enosburg Falls Middle and High School. I'm happy to be able to share with you some highlights about our school, some things that I'm particularly proud of this year. In our middle school, one of the big changes this year is that in order to make sure all of our kids can read at a proficient level, our 6th through 8th graders are engaged in the Amplify Structured Literacy program. And we are beginning to see improvements in our math and literacy data for the students in grades 6 through 8. We also have school-wide
new social emotional curriculum Wayfinder that students are engaging in their advisories in the middle school, and in the high school we call home base,
what you might have called
homeroom or advisory. So
we also have
a little bit of restructuring.
The ninth grade
this year is
working as a
team of teachers to help students better transition to high school.
Our disciplinary
referrals are down
just
by
under half
compared to where they were at last year.
Additionally, the teachers
took some time
to plan
collaboratively,
and they have
daily planning time throughout the school year where they can discuss
student issues,
if there are behavior concerns, and certainly academic concerns,
to help our ninth
graders be more successful.
And is well known,
a successful ninth grade year
generally translates
into
a much higher likelihood of
students graduating.
Our ninth graders are
also
working on
their new Portrait of a Learner graduation requirements.
These are
things
that students will demonstrate and keep evidence of in order to show that they've mastered the 31 skills that our school district teachers and community and students worked on that will help them be ready for life after high school, college, and career and community. Few things
that always bear reminding are that our junior ROTC program is just one of three in the state, along with Newport and Barry, and they continue to
compete against the other programs in marksmanship, and the color guard is also frequent presenter, whether at graduation, athletic events, and certainly certain holidays, including Veterans Day in Lincoln Park. We feature six advanced placement programs. They are physics. We have two in math, calculus, statistics. We also have two in social studies, government, and psychology, and then we have an AP English class. Advanced placement classes are highly regarded nationwide by colleges and for college admissions. Sometimes they transfer for credit, but even when they don't, they are highly regarded as a sign that a student is taking classes available. We also have an anatomy and physiology class, which is taught at approximately the AP level. This year, we are doing more to integrate technology into our classes. Our physics class is going to be participating in a robot battle of the bots, not the violent kind, I don't think. They will be showing off a robot in a Northern New England contest, and they are building it right now in not this instance, they're on vacation, but they are building it this
semester in the physics class.
We also have
a STEAM lab. STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics.
And we created
next to the art room upstairs
a space where students can do multidisciplinary and multimedia creation. So they can do some
working with wood, working with plastics, with moldings,
play. And right now we have a class that is learning to do project management. So they are creating a community installation, and
and
we'll
we'll
be
be
showing
showing
it
it
off
off
at the
at the
spring.
end of the spring.
So they are learning to
So they
manage
are learning to manage projects
that
that are
multidisciplinary,
multidisciplinary, as I said,
that involve
that involve
creativity.
creativity.
So
So creativity at the focus.
We now have a place
We now have
for
a
students
place
to do
for
that, and
students
it's
to do that, and
adjacent
it's
to
adjacent to our
computer lab.
computer lab.
I would also
I would also
mention
mention
that
that
our music and arts programs
have
have
been
been
highly successful this year.
We had over
We
a
had
dozen
over
students
a dozen students participate in
the regional
the regional music festival, instrumental and
choral.
choral.
And we also had
And we also had 6 choral students
who qualified
for all New England's music festival,
which is a big deal,
which means
that our programs
are growing and increasing
in the success
of the students.
And finally,
And
our
finally,
theater
our theater program
produced its second musical since the pandemic days.
days.
And that was
Little Shop of
Our
Horrors.
first musical was the Addams Family
musical
a year ago.
and this
Little
fall,
Shop of Horrors
Little Shop of Horrors opened
on
on
the
the
Enosburg
Falls
Middle
Middle
and
High
High
School
School
stage
with
with
full
a
band
and
microphones
microphones
and
and
ever-increasing
ever-increasing
set building as
set building
we have
as we
a
have a
class
set building class
where
where we trust ninth graders with
drills
drills
and
and screwdrivers and saws
under
under
the
the
watch fly
their
their
teacher
teacher
to put together
a
a beautiful stage
So,
set. So
I am
I
extremely
am extremely proud of everything that's
on
going
at
on at
Enosburg
Enosburg Falls Middle High School this year.
You will probably hear
You will probably hear a little bit more from
our
our
superintendent
or business
and
manager,
also from
and also from Heather Hawkins, who is the administrator of our middle school.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming this evening, and I wish you all the best. Spring is on the way.
Yeah, spring is on the way. Dawkins or Hawkins?
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the middle school, and in particular how we build community, what we've been doing for the year. This is our middle school.
I don't have access to something. It says I don't have access to any new object.
That's okay. That's okay. Be nice and work hard. This is our hallway upstairs. I actually found out today from an old principal of the Enosburg Middle School that one of the B's is upside down. Well, I guess the B is upside down. I don't know how they painted it, but it looks good. You can't tell. Can I touch it?
No, I have it.
One thing that I did with the staff in the summer is we talked and looked at what are our values? What are we going to come back to make decisions throughout the year? And what are we really going to focus on? And they were belonging in community, integrity, learning, respect, and perseverance. One thing that they've been doing for quite a while is every month we gather in the auditorium for a community meeting. And these community meetings we always start with a game. And then we might offer a 10-minute or quick video about being kind or something that we want to focus on. These are consistent though. We have an all-star, sometimes 2 every month, where 2 or 3 weeks before, the teachers all meet and pick a student who is being responsible, who's being kind, getting their work done, just a student that we want to recognize. And they write a speech, the student does, as well as their TA council, their TA, teacher advisory teacher. So we also invite their parents to come to see that. And the kids all get really excited about that award. We also picked Star Bears, so we have this big jug and everyone writes compliments and such. And at community meeting, we pick out 8 names, they get a bag, and they get all excited. So We just finished our community meeting for February, where we actually did a game with the students and the staff, an abbreviation game. They had to guess the saying by just abbreviations. It was really funny and fun. Go ahead. So we have that's fine. We have a teacher advisory council. So each of my 6 teachers has a TA. And they pick one student, nominate one student to represent them. And this council meets every Tuesday. And they plan our events. This was a gratitude video. We did Kindness Week, and they made a video about it. We did Post-its and said great things about each other. We recently just had a fun day, and they made pancakes for all of us. So we had a pancake breakfast.
How often are the community meetings? Not that I want to stop you,
No, it's okay.
the game and the. I don't
Once
wanna-
a month.
Once a month, okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Wayfinder Tuesdays. So Wayfinder is the SEL program at FNESU that we've adopted this year to guide our social emotional learning. And we do it every Tuesday from 12:45 to 1:45 in grade level classes. And our teachers teach it. It's every Tuesday. The 6th grade focuses on building consensus and connection, through self-awareness and community. 7th grade focus is understanding, valuing, and accepting ourselves. And the 8th grade focus is understanding, valuing, and accepting each other. And our students love Wayfinder Tuesdays. These are some quotes. They like the lessons. They're fun. I actually had a great opportunity 2 weeks ago to teach one of those lessons and was so impressed with the 7th graders in that room who obviously the teacher had created a really great safe space for all of them, and they were being vocal and respecting each other's opinions and able to have a really hard conversation and learn about habits of mind. So that was cool. So Waypoints is an assessment for social emotional learning. I just wanted to show you real quick. We just gave one. We're only giving one this year. Our awesome SEL director for the FNESU is Callie Goss, and she's leading this work. And so, but we just gave this summative assessment, and these self-awareness, adaptability, empathy, collaboration, agency, and purpose are all of the things the assessment was measuring, where the kids felt they were. And it ends up giving us what is your top skill, what is your most improved skill. And for every class, we can look where's the area of growth. So for like the 6th grade, it came out as collaboration. So now going into the second half of this year, we can really focus on what are some opportunities to teach the 6th graders collaboration. Our academic community, I'm particularly proud of some of this. We do a responsibility of learning. It's a rubric for our kids: preparation for class, engagement and participation, kindness and respect, work completion, and attendance. And at the end of the quarter, for all the kids who have a P, which is proficient, or E, exemplary, they receive a bonus fun day. So we've put a little reinforcement in there for them. Quarter 1, we took them all to the movies at the Weldon Theater. And quarter 2, and this is what this picture is, we all went to the UVM women's basketball game. And quarter 3, we always do it as a surprise. The students have the opportunity during the quarter 3 times to self-assess and for the teacher to assess. And I've pushed this because then the student knows where they're going and where they're at and what they have to improve on to get to the responsibility of learning. Professional learning communities, otherwise known as PLCs in the academic world. This is something new this year that my teachers are all meeting on Thursday mornings from 8:20 to 9:30. And it's really increased their collaboration and their ability to share strategies and teaching practices with each other. WIN time, yet again, another acronym. it's what I need time. And this is 3 times a week for 30 minutes each, where the students get targeted instruction or reteaching. All students participate. And right now we're in round 4. So we started out doing about 4 weeks of wind time in a round. And now my teachers are so invested, they've asked me for 6. So we're where we want to be. And they use data and collaboration to make those wind groups. So I just wanted to share a little bit of data I'm proud of. Our STAR assessment is what they take fall, winter, and spring. And they do it in literacy and in math. And this, from when they took it in the fall to when they took it in the winter, 71% of the 6th graders improved their scores. 41% of those improved their score by 21 to 40 points. 7th grade, we had 59% improve their scores, and 35 of those between 1 and 20 points. And then the 8th grade, 69% of them improved their score, and 30% of those students increased their score by 1 to 20 points. STAR Math, we have seen great improvement as well. From fall to winter, 59% of 6th grade improved their score. 35% of those students went up 41 to 60 points. Our 7th grade STAR Math, 63% improved their score, with 40% of those students increasing their score by over 80 points. And then 8th grade, 73% of students improved their score, 32% increased their score by 1 to 20 points. Any questions?
So that was exciting that this increase.
It is exciting. We have I have a board in my office. It's covered with paper, but underneath the paper is all the kids' pictures. And as they go up assessment levels, the teachers get to move their pictures up, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah. Is this the first full year that we're using STAR, the second year? Because then were we using a different program before that, STAR?
Are you thinking about Savers and Wayfinder?
No.
No.
Testing.
So,
There's a
we've
couple.
used STAR for several years,
Yeah,
actually.
that was
Yeah.
a different program that we were using.
VCAP is the state test.
Maybe that's what they
So
We
BT
do
cap is just year 2?
Yeah.
This is year 2, it used to be SBAC before that.
That's what.
No, wait, yes, they've changed the regularly. BCAP, SBAC, BT cap, it was SBAC before the BT cap.
And they will take the VCAP is a Vermont assessment. They will take that in March.
How many students do you have in middle school?
In middle school, 114.
114, okay.
In the last piece that was up there about the math and the improvement, do you have the numbers on that? Was it
Like the number of kids?
well, you just said you have 114 in the middle
Yes.
school, roughly distributed evenly through the 3?
The improvement? Or the kids? Yes, I get what you're saying.
Okay, so.
I think 6th grade has like 41 students, 7th grade has around 37, 38, and the same with 8th grade.
Okay, so in that number, do you have a number of those students that made that big increase?
I do. I don't have it with me. I didn't put it on there. I figured out the percentages, but I do have that, and I can, if you want, I can find it. And
I think we could jot the question down. If you want to give us contact information, we'll have Courtney do that.
I missed the question. Could you repeat what his question?
he was just wondering, instead of percentages of the kids who've improved, how many actual students?
Okay. My only comment, it's not really a question, but I think that this presentation was very good. There's no doubt about that. But I think that there should be more, maybe, of you putting pictures out of the kids when they're having fun or whatever. Because we get no information about what's happening inside this building.
You mean like put it out in not on social media, but on other things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good to
I
know.
think there should be a page there maybe for middle high school.
There is a high school page.
Yeah,
It
but-
has it includes the middle school, but we need to put middle
Right.
school and more stuff. It needs to be more
Exactly.
inclusive.
Like the
Yes.
pancake breakfast. and
Yes,
the-
yeah.
The different community events.
For sure. For sure. That's good
I want
to
to
know.
ask Lynn a question. I got the email about tonight, so how many people did you send that to?
The email about tonight.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look behind me.
I sent it to every person in our district
And
and
staff, parents.
staff and parents. And I also put it on Front Porch Forum a couple of times, and I've been putting it on our Facebook page and our website very, very often in the last 3 weeks.
Okay, well, just looking
And
around,
reports.
okay, we got a lot of gray hairs here. Okay, our parenting mostly, for most of us, has passed.
Mhm.
So,
Well, so parents were invited to this?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
All
Oh,
parents,
yeah.
definitely.
Even, yeah, our middle and high school, like Enosburg, we sent it out to everybody.
I
and
did
then-
see you there,
So we had,
Is there one parent here?
I
but you
sent
got a
it,
hat
Two.
on, can you tell if your hair's gray or not?
I sent it out to every person in the supervisory union. It came from me, staff and students. And then each school individually sent it out as well to their parents and staff. And then, like I said, I've been putting it on everybody's Facebooks quite
Well,
often.
and it was.
And it's
here.
in the books,
It was
yeah.
in here, although it wasn't like, it was sort of hidden on the back page. But I think, didn't you look on, did you see it on Front Porch Forum then? Word?
I may have, yeah.
You did see it on,
Yep, I put it on Front Porch
I
Forum.
think
I don't watch Front Porch.
the district as a whole, it doesn't use, and even worse, the town, doesn't use Front Porch Forum.
We can only use it 2 times a month. So,
What?
yeah.
You do?
I can only post 2 times a month, so.
That's Front Porch Forum, limited?
Only two, that's our
That's it.
limit?
Yep, that's my limit. I can't go any more than 2 times. So the next time I'll post on Front Porch Forum will be on Monday to say the voting
Well,
time.
what about a cadre of people like me, who you'd send it to me and say, put this on Thursday, I'll put it on Thursday.
Oh, yeah, could you do
So
that?
do you have no limits?
What?
Do you have no limits?
Well, I got something recently in the last 3 years, I've put 30 or 40 posts.
Yeah, for education.
No, I can
I'm
understand
not
what's
sure
going on
why,
with
but
it.
that's our.
You can take my name down, I'll send out anything you tell me that's gonna help with community. And then I bet you could find 5 or 10 of us.
Mhm. The other thing I've wondered about was getting an email listserv of community members that were interested. I've asked about that before and I didn't really get a lot of interest in that because it's difficult to reach people that don't have kids in the school, especially if they're people that don't use the internet much, don't go on social media. So the only way we really can get to everyone is to mail. But
Yeah.
mailing is also very expensive, so we
Yeah.
really only do that one time.
I did forget one other method I used this year. I made a poster with all of the dates and the locations, and I sent it to every town clerk, every library, every school, and I said, please post this. So some people posted it physically in their offices, some people posted it on their Facebook pages. So I sent it that way too, to all
You
the
mean
places.
this
in town.
information, like,
Yep.
what's your, you made a poster and you gave it to everybody?
We're open to feedback. If there are different ways that you think that we could communicate with you, that would be helpful for us because we want to be able to get to you.
Well,
There are also
right
some.
here, you got
there's
60
at least
years
one or
of people
two.
who've been in education. And you know what, I don't know about you guys, but it's always been a problem. Hasn't it, Shirley, Pauline?
Well, the reason I know is because I'm on my grandson's middle school account still, so that's why I know.
Well, thank you all for coming. It is vacation week too, but Jim.
So, going back to the scores on the tests. So when you were discussing them, you talked about it as points of improvement. So that means percentage of questions right on the exam? I guess put some context around what it means to have improved by 60 points or whatever, does that mean 60% of the questions more were correct than the first time around? Or what does points mean, I guess?
So points of the raw score that they come out with, I'm
And how many points on the exams?
To like 100?
I think it's 100. But I
Okay,
will.
so those
no,
increases
it's more
were
than
out
that.
of
It's
100.
more than that. They can come out with a score with like 1450 or 19. I don't know what each one is
Yes.
worth,
It's a scale
Yeah.
score.
but it's a scaled score, and there's levels. They have level 4, 3, 2, 1, and 4 being exceeding, proficient, and then yellow is there some skills are missing. You should have actually asked Lydia. She should have brought you home her 2
Yeah,
scores,
I looked at it.
and you can. And I would love actually to talk to you after about some feedback around that, because they're really hard to understand, and so it's hard to know which report to send home,
Okay.
for sure.
And I would love for you to send that our way too, because we have people that work on some of that reporting too. Right?
Okay. So along that same line though, there's a couple of graphs in the report where I'm looking at blue and green bars, and it's described as improvement from fall to winter scores. Okay, so what I'm wondering is whether the basis for which those percentages are listed increase from fall to winter. So are there additional skills in the winter testing that were not present on the fall testing? Or was it the same set of skills and the kids just learned that much more toward the same ceiling as going from fall to winter? I'm asking this to get some context around what those increases between the fall and winter scores really mean.
I think that's a really great question that came up in one of our other buildings. I have someone in my office whose responsibility is the data and assessment piece, so I'm gonna answer it the way I think it is, and if I'm wrong, Jim, I'm going to get back to you on it. So I think it's norm for the time of the year. So where you would expect those students to be in the fall, and then mid-year, like what's the benchmark for each of those points within the year? So it should get progressively harder, but I will be honest with you, I've not seen that, I can't put my eyes exactly on that assessment to be able to measure it myself. It's not something I've been able to look at.
Okay.
So we can dig into that, and I'll double check that I was correct. A note for Leah.
Lynn, can I just
About that.
address that, since I see what you get, you don't really know what the numbers mean, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
69%.
But I'll tell you, I've been subbing a lot, even though I'm retired quite a few years. And I subbed last fall in middle school, and I had to read their assessments and it's written word. And I saw a big difference from when those 8th graders particularly that wrote their assessments, I saw a big difference than I did for the kids that I had in 2021 in health class, and they had to write assessments. Now, they were coming off COVID, so I guess that's understandable. But I can see a big improvement just in the 3 years, in their writing skills anyway.
Okay.
You're definitely making me think that we should attach some other, and I think this is feedback we just got from someone online too, some other description that goes out with that report. I know we have some obligations around the reporting when students are falling far below the targets, things that were just passed this last legislative session that we need to let parents know, but it sounds like how to unpack the score is something that we could do a better job of, so I will take that back.
Benchmark.
I guess to piggyback on what he's saying, so we know, I mean, I applaud the improvement, but do we know the baseline? What's our starting point? I guess, so we know we improved 50%, starting from what number, for proficiency rates? You know,
I don't,
obviously,
do you mean
we're starting-
overall?
Overall,
Like-
I mean, we're starting from an average overall proficiency rate in math, reading, science.
Yeah, I
We have
don't have that one
66%
with me.
improvement, but what is our starting point?
I didn't look at the numbers as an overall on this, we're looking at them by grade level. Because one of the things to know about the STAR assessment too is that these are intended to be formative assessments, and I'm going to get into that a little bit on my presentation. They're intended to be formative assessments so that the teachers can look at them, those teams that Heather is talking about, where those teachers get together and they gather and plan what they're going to do for that reteach time, or what's called WIN, what I need time. They look at the skill level, so it's intended really to inform more of that, to be able to say, you know, these 3 students don't have a grasp on these skills, and these are necessary at this grade level, so I'm going to put these 3 together, and these are the specific skills I'm going to target, and these 3 students are missing these skills. So it's intended to be able to tease it apart right down to the skill level, to be able to intervene so that they can get to proficiency at the end of the year. So we do look at the percentages, but it really is more intended to look at what's our progress over time. We're pleased this year, the first year of our new science of reading based literacy programs. I'm hearing from teachers all over the supervisory union that the rigor is much better, and they're seeing outcomes with students that are much better than they expected. So I'm hopeful we're going to see solid growth by the spring data, and hopefully that translates into the VTCAP assessment as well. But there are different types of assessments that we use for different purposes, and the STAR really is to inform instruction.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to point out too, it's not the only assessment, right? It's one piece of it. And Amplify, the new science of reading curriculum that we are using, is Leah, who is one of our assistant director of curriculum in literacy. She's able to look at the Amplify scores and compare them with STAR, and it very much does inform instruction. So they're also looking at classwork pieces and bringing all those things together.
Who sets the testing system that produces these, the outcome data?
Who builds the local comprehensive assessment plan? Is that what you mean?
No, presumably there's something called call them tests, or an assessment document that's set for the students. Is that
I
right?
don't think I know what you mean.
How do you collect the
What
data
test?
that you're
Oh, it's
reporting?
online.
What?
It's all online, so it feeds their.
Who has set those?
Is your question who makes up the questions?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a standardized, it's through the STAR assessment. I actually don't know what company.
Renaissance?
Renaissance Learning.
Yeah.
So there's no local input into the outcomes or measurement? Are the outcomes defined by
Not for
us?
that assessment. We do have some local assessment measures that are embedded in there, but that is not one that we create or manipulate in any way.
So this is a kind of like a TSA I mean, it's online, they do it
Yeah.
online?
Yeah,
It's like a SAT kind of a test, but for young kids. I mean, it's a
it's a little
testing
different than SAT, but the
service.
structure of doing it
Yeah, we've had-
online is, yeah.
We've had that kind of testing forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that actually the graph is pretty easy to read, because if I was to take grade 3 in the literacy, I think it's, I'll look at the bottom one. I would say if I was a teacher, 60% of my students are performing at that level, which, coming up here, 60% is performing at a certain level. And when the test is given the following, down the road, 64% of my students are performing at that level. So I can say, okay, I've got 4% growth from the beginning to that time. The thing is, we just don't know what that 60% means. That's the key.
Yeah, I'd ask the question, what's going on in 10th and 11th, 12th?
Yeah, I
grade?
That's a great question.
I will answer that question. It's tough. It's with the STAR assessment, and again, this is one formative assessment that we use, right? So it's combined with a lot of things, but our 10th and 11th, like once you get to 10th and 11th and 12th, well, 12th grade, we don't even make them do it. They literally go through it and just press buttons. Like there's no real motivation for them. There's no intrinsic motivation to do well. And I think one of the things to focus on going forward is what are the high school educators using that data to inform? Because I think in the past, it really hasn't truly been embraced as a measure for them. So I think they get to that point and they just,
I'm gonna add to
And
that.
these were the COVID, these were the 8th grade COVID, that was 10th, 11th, and 12th. Well, we have a
the 12th graders, yes.
I have a grandson that's decided, he was in the 8th grade with COVID, and it really hurt. I mean, it really hurt him, all kinds of things, and he has he dissed the test. They dissed the test.
I think I want to add to this, so we've done a lot of work around it's called our multi-tiered system of supports, and it's what we do to support students from the classroom level to the level where they need intervention, more targeted intervention, special education, and something totally different. We've done a lot of that work in our elementary, middle schools. Later to the game is the high school structures. So the high school MTSS systems are not yet as vibrant as the elementary. And I think to Heather's point, they're not yet seeing relevance. And I think that our elementary students are. We've had some of these presentations where the principals have talked about how kids are goal setting and how if they get, a 50-point increase, they're running to the principal's office to say, look at my STAR score. They're so proud of themselves for doing that. So, and I think they see the connection to these are some of the assessments that we use to help provide them intervention. I think as our MTSS system continues to evolve at the high school level, the intention is that we'll be able to have interventionists working at that level too, so that when they're really struggling in the classroom and they've got some lagging skills, that we can identify what those skills are and then we can intervene to be able to backfill some of those things. So I think I'm hopeful that once there's a connection to that and they see that I really do want to put my best effort in so that they know what I know, or else, I'm gonna have to go to this intervention that I don't need, right? So that's where we're heading with this.
And the social emotional.
I've noticed a mention, as it's really praiseworthy, of the teachers getting together and talking about their kids.
Yes.
At this more aggregated level, have you brought the kids into talking with the teachers about what's going on?
So I think there are examples of places that's happened. It's not standardized across the system.
To me, the kids are pretty smart.
The high school kids.
In terms of the assessment piece, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Like that 11th and 12th grade thing, I'd get randomly chosen bunch of 10th, 11th, 12th graders say, look, we saw this.
Mm-hmm.
We don't like it, you? And then,
Right.
what's going on here?
Do you know if that has happened?
I know 2 years ago, I was the assistant principal in the high school.
Right.
And I figured out on the STAR data how you could tell if a kid really didn't try.
Yeah.
So I think I made a list of about 40 kids, and I went to each of those kids, and I said, look, I don't know. Maybe you did try, maybe you didn't. Like, do you want a chance to take it over again? Or when we get to fall, you'll be in an intervention group. And pretty much 38 of those kids took it over. So I think once they know someone was noticing, they were invested and not wanting to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's building and
That's a good point.
it needs to get there.
I have an anecdote. My teaching experience in middle school, high schools was in rural Africa, rural Kenya with my bride. That had 9th and 10th grade when we got there. And we saw it through till it was the first class graduated. And I had one, Cheryl's left-handed, I'm right-handed, and I was the principal. And so Cheryl was getting, Africans don't use their left hand except for one thing, and it's not one you talk about.
Have to be
And so
right-handed.
she'd write on a blackboard with her left hand and stuff, but it created, there was some funny business going on, cross-cultural dissonance, and I knew it was a problem. So I went in one day to the highest class that was going to graduate, and I said, okay, you guys, I'm going to write down 12 names, and I'm going to write down names of kids who they can't read each other's writing. I wrote down 10 or 12 of them. I had the list, and I asked the class, okay, I told them, I'm sorry, I told them that I could tell who was left, that every group of humans has left-handers, and I said, I can tell you who they are here. So I did a list of the kids with the worst handwritings. I've been reading stuff they wrote for 2 or 3 years, and I showed them, okay, I bet these kids have trouble kicking the soccer ball with your left foot. And they said, how did you guess? I was only off by 1 or 2 kids. And then we had a conversation in the classroom. I was guessing that I was going to get it, but I had a conversation in the classroom about left-handedness and right-handedness, and problem went away. So you talk, if you can get the kids talking about it, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you did that with those kids.
Yeah.
Yes. So Morgan and I have prepared a budget presentation that we'd like to go through. I'll tip you that I know the governor's proposal for education transformation, I suspect, may be on your mind. That's a piece at the end that we'll talk about, and we're happy to take questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Lynn Coda, I'm the superintendent for Franklin Northeast. For those of you who don't know me, I have lived here my whole life. I grew up in Montgomery. I chose to raise all of my children here. So all 4 of my kids graduated from Enosburg High School. And now I'm in the best phase of parenting. I'm a grandmother, and my oldest granddaughter is actually a preschooler in the elementary school. So what happens here matters a lot to me, and my work is really personal to me, and it's something that I'm proud of. I'm proud of what's happening here in this system, and it's something that I'm very invested in. So we'll jump in. I'm sorry, do you want to introduce?
And my name is Morgan Daybell. I'm the CFO for Franklin Northeast. I've been in that role for about 12 years, and the 10 years prior to that, I was on the Montgomery School Board, and all 1 of my children went through Montgomery Elementary and Enosburg High School.
We're just following each other around. So I will start with some celebrations. I won't go through all of it because I know that you all have, what page? You all have this in front of you. She has this memorized. I should give her credit. She did an amazing job of helping to put this together. There are a lot of celebrations and things for us to be proud of here in Franklin Northeast, and here are just a few of them, from the 4 state championship titles that our students earned to some really amazing student presentations. In the Enosburg-Richford district, we had an educator that was recognized by UVM as FNESU's Educator of the Year. That's Kristen Baker from Richford High School. And then we had Deb Tannenberger here at the high school. She is the high school reading and math specialist, and she was FNESU's Educator of the Year. And our support staff of the year went to Sue Hunt, who works in the planning room over at Enosburg Elementary School. So there are other celebrations. We would love for you to read this piece. You stole my thunder a little bit, but that's okay. This is very similar data to what is called it out in that book. It's just in a little bit of a different format. And I'll add just a couple pieces, but I feel like we've talked a little bit about this. So the way that we are reporting out is fall is the first line, the second line is winter, which you tuned into. In Vermont, there's a literacy bill that was passed, and that we now are having to do communications out with families when they're at a specific level, if they're lagging by a specific level. So our goal when we look at this data in this way is to increase the green here, which is at or above, and decrease the other colors. So this tan color is on watch. So those are kids that are nearly there. They're really close. The gold color is those students are below level, and the red is they're pretty far below. They're in need of targeted urgent intervention. So we're seeing good growth, and we're hopeful that we're going to see that at the end of the year as well. I will just call out this first grade group here. There is a little bit of, I would consider a testing discrepancy, but it's actually, I'll explain why. So when kids enter first grade, they take the STAR early literacy assessment because they're not expected to come in being a reader. So the good news is so many of them are reading now that many of them have shifted to the STAR literacy. So even though it looks like we've seen a decline, we're not considering that a decline because those students are now taking the much harder assessment measure. So we're watching that to see where we go at the end of the year for their measure. So for some of those students, it was a different assessment from fall until winter. In math, we talked a little bit about what we've been doing with literacy with the new science of reading based programs that we were able to invest in. We also have interventionists who are targeting. We talked about the MTSS system that we've been building to try to get really good at identifying where the needs are and addressing them before they become big gaps in learning. We've also been working on math, and we've been working on math for several years. We do a lot of work with All Learners Network and a lot of professional learning, pulling teacher groups together to look at data, to look at instructional practice, on making strategic decisions around that. And I think that you could see that we've got some better proficiency levels in math, and we're also seeing some pretty good growth patterns there as well. So I'm putting this up here because we're presenting to you the Enosburg-Richford district budget. So we have kind of a strange structure of governance in Vermont. So we're the Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union, and we have two districts that operate within the supervisory union. So you're voting on one of the district budgets as Enosburg residents. So that you're operating the following schools. You have two pre-K through 5 schools serving 444 students, two 6 through 12 high schools serving 659 students. And we are thankful that we have our own career technical center where we serve 135 students. So I just want to point out these are not another 135 students. They're also reflected in this number here. With the addition, we do now have some students tuitioning in to our career and technical center from BFA Fairfax, Maple Run, and Missisquoi Valley.
We start the budget process each year by looking at enrollment, and before I go into these numbers, I will say we're going over a lot of numbers pretty quickly tonight. Everything we touch on tonight is in much more detail on our website, fnesu.org, and you can also go there or go to the individual schools' pages to get a more detailed report on the state of the school for each one. So if you go to the just next slide. We'll look at the last 5 years of enrollment numbers from October. So these are the kids that are actually showing up in our school on October 1st. And then we project that out for the next 5 years as we start thinking long-term about budgets and staffing needs. You'll see on this chart that in both Richford High School and in Enosburg High School, we're anticipating an increase over the next few years before it levels off. The two elementary schools, both relatively flat, kind of moving opposite of each other a little bit. And again, we won't spend any time on this other than to say the experience that we have in Franklin Northeast in this district and in the other district, as well as just northwestern Vermont in general, is much different than what's going on in the rest of the state, especially the southern part of the state, the eastern part of the state, where they're seeing a pretty significant decline in student population. The annual meeting, the budget meeting this year, all articles are by Australian ballot. And so for the first 4 articles, we're talking about electing the officers of the district. Article 1 is to elect a moderator. Pat Hayes, who is the current moderator, has filed a petition to run again. For any that have a candidate, you also have an opportunity to write somebody in. The moderator doesn't really do so much anymore with these districts where all the votes by Australian ballot. Billy Joe Draper, who's the Enosburg town clerk and is also the district clerk, is running again for election. And then for Article 3, we elect a treasurer, and the article reads to name the supervisor union treasurer as the district treasurer. This is something that the Northern Mountain Valley District has done in the past. The supervisor union treasurer is Fran Jackson, who used to be elected to that position and is no longer an Enosburg resident. And so to keep her in that role, this is the way to do that. We'll also be electing 2 school board positions. One is a resident of Enosburg, one is a resident of Richford, but everybody in both towns gets to vote on both candidates. So Enosburg residents aren't just voting for the Enosburg candidate. In Enosburg, Joshua Muir is running for re-election to that seat. There's no other candidate that's filed. For the Richford seat, no candidate filed in time. The current incumbent, Devin Lumbra, is running again as a write-in. And then we get to Article 5, which we'll spend more time on. And this is the one that gives the school board authority to spend a certain amount of money for the next school year. So the article reads, looking for approval to spend $25.2 million, and we'll go into that in greater depth in the next few slides. There's also a second sentence that's added. It was brought back by the legislature after it had been gone for about 5 years. And it takes that number and it puts it in terms of a per pupil education spending amount, 11,139, which we will go over in depth later, and then how much that has changed from the previous year. In this district, 8.6%, and we'll talk about that later as well and why that's a little bit misleading a percentage.
So when we built this budget, there were several things that we had to contend with. So the first is that we were in negotiations with our support staff last year, and that negotiation did not conclude until after the budget year that we're in, after that budget was already approved. So we had to build that increase into this budget. And we are also in negotiations with our teachers and our support staff for this year and beyond. So we have added where we think we will land into this budget as well. So when we look at salaries for our support staff and for our teachers, that is up $872,137. There are some staff members that I think that, let me just say that there's some uncertainty about federal funding for public schools in the United States. And we're worried about some of the teachers that we have that are in grant funded positions. So we think going into next year that it is unlikely that we'll see that money completely go away, but we are expecting that we'll see some level of reduction in our next year consolidated federal grant money. So we strategically looked at if we had, if we have to have a reduction, what can we do with the staffing levels so that we don't lose those important pieces? So when we're talking about academic proficiency, it's really important for us to have the positions that we need within our multi-tiered system of support. So we need the teachers, and we need the interventionists, and we need the special educators, and we need the instructional coaches to be able to intervene with those teachers who are brand new to the profession. So we have several interventionists. That's what most principals use their consolidated grant money for, is interventionists. So there were a couple of those, or was it two? We'll see on the next slide actually, that principals made the decision to pull those out just to be safe and put them in the local budget. So we did see an increase in staffing because of those shifts. We think with what came out, based on what the principals did, plus we have a retirement. It's not a lot of staff members that we fund that way, but we're hopeful that we'll weather the storm for this next fiscal year and not have to reduce staffing under the federal grants. We're not as clear about the year after that. That seems like it's highly likely that we'll see much more significant reductions at that point. Do you want to add anything about the federal?
Yeah, I'll just kind of put it into a SUI perspective. We're probably about 10% of the budget overall in a normal year comes from the feds. And so we are in March now, we're about halfway through the federal year that ends in September of 2025. I don't think we have a budget yet for this year that we're working in, and that's the budget that sets most of the grant money that we receive for FY26, the budget year that we're talking about. So what we have heard from the new administration is potentially cutting out Title II money completely. It's about $250,000 for FNESU. Cutting back Title I money, which is about $1 million in a normal year for us. We get maybe $750,000 of special ed money directly from the feds, and we haven't really heard one way or the other on that. The after-school program and Heather's salary is funded by a 21C grant. That's federally, ultimately federal money that comes there. Haven't heard anything about that, but that's certainly on our radar. And then at least $1 million in money that supports the food service program. And it seems like that is getting scrutiny at the federal level, so we will not be surprised if there's a cut there.
Everybody has to protest about this whole thing that's happening. We all have to do that.
There are challenging times that we're facing, certainly around a lot of things in public school in general for what we're talking about tonight. So I'm not sure what we're doing with our technical difficulties, but I'll shift to sharing my screen. I know it's not very large, but I'll read what you see there. So the other thing that that was really factored in was health insurance. So this is the third year in a row we've seen more than a double-digit increase in our health insurance premiums. So that is 12.6% change from last year to this year. And in this budget, that accounts for $198,641. Additionally, there are other impacts to different insurance benefits, including life, long-term disability, and dental. When you look at all of those in this district, that's up around $103,733. We also had increases in high school tuition revenue through a reduction in students. Do you want to talk about that piece?
Sure. A big chunk of the Enosburg-Richford budget is offset by tuition payments that the 4 towns in Northern Mountain Valley send because they send high school students. We're anticipating a reduction in the number of students that are coming, but because the tuition rate is going up, we'll actually get more revenue, and that additional revenue helps bring down the tax rate. And we'll go over that when we start talking about tax rates as well.
Oops, I guess I could have done it.
You're saying it's gonna be near the bottom of the state in per pupil spending?
Yeah, I'm gonna show you a visual
On
of
this
that.
budget
Yes.
that you want us to pass?
Yeah.
I mean,
We're
you
hopeful.
want this budget to pass, but it's still one of the lowest
Correct.
in the state. Okay.
So this pie chart shows just the increase in the budget from year to year and kind of how it's broken up. So we talked about just generally being in negotiations with our teachers and support staff. That anticipated increase is making up a little more than half. This section in orange is increase in health insurance, again, for those existing staff. Section in this, whatever blue that is, other benefits, be dental insurance, long-term disability, life insurance, FICA, Medicaid, things like that, in that slice. This 17% is the cost of moving those people out of the federal grant and into the local budget. And then this 8% up top is the increase of everything else. So that increase is covering increased fuel costs, any increases in terms of supplies or athletics or after school, extracurricular activities that we're increasing for kids. So again, a relatively small piece of the pie.
So the staffing changes in this budget, so we are up 1.8 professional staff, and that's what I had talked to you about moving from consolidated federal grants. So that's a half of a school counselor at Enosburg Elementary School, plus 1 interventionist at Richford Elementary School, and 0.3, so a day and a half of an interventionist at Richford Junior Senior High School. We are also, in the next section, down 0.17, so that is less than a half day down. So we had embedded in the budget that we're currently in a quarter-time work-based learning teacher here at Enosburg Middle High School and a quarter-time at Richford Junior Senior High School. And what we had done in years past was put those 2 positions together with a half-time position at Cold Hollow, and we make 1 full-time position. Cold Hollow found someone that only wanted a half-time position. So we were not able to fill these 2, but we found people within the buildings that had the appropriate licensure, so we were able to shift those duties onto other staff members. I think it was round 3 last year. Our budget went down 2 times on this side, and I think it may have been round 2, but I think it's round 3. We cut a third of the Spanish teacher position at Enosburg Middle High School. And then we had to do a little shift in the budget last year, and that had to do with, I think that was also round 3. I do a terrible job of describing this part. Do you think that you could explain that part?
So we had, as you know, 2 failed budget votes last year. During those 2 rounds, we cut back hours for custodians and then for guidance as well. We are adding back the counselor. We're actually moving a counselor from Richford Elementary to Cold Hollow. That's kind of adjusting for that shift as we are now going through the school year and seeing the impact. And then adding back a custodian, half-time custodian at Enosburg Elementary. They were down to 1.5 in the budget that passed, and we're finding that that's not enough.
So it really isn't taking a counselor away from Richford High School. They weren't able to hire, so we were shifting part of one from Cold Hollow to Richford last year because of the budget adjustment, and we're righting that. Paraeducators are the same in this district, so you're down 1 paraeducator at Enosburg Elementary and up 1 at Richford Elementary School.
So I will walk us through quickly how we go from a hopefully approved budget to a tax rate. And again, each of these numbers is going into much more detail on our website, and I'm happy to stay afterwards and talk to folks. But we start with the budget that the board has warned and we are voting on Tuesday, and we certainly hope you pass, and that is the spending plan for the district. From that, we know we are going to get about $6.2 million in revenue into the district. Most of that is tuition money for high school students and for tech students coming from the Northern Mountain Valley District. There are some other funding streams, mostly tied to the tech center, that come from the state. We are also proposing using $645,000 of the money that was left over at the end of 2024, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's basically money that we have in the bank, and so we don't need to raise that money from taxes to support this budget. So if we take the past budget, less the money we think is coming in, less the money we know we have in the bank, we come up with a ed spending amount of $18,300,000. This is the amount of money that in May, when the state starts collecting their information, we will send into them and say, this is the money we need from the education fund, from the property taxes and meals and rooms taxes, in order to support this budget. This is also the number, one of the numbers that we will use to kind of compare our spending to other districts. To come up with a tax rate, we take that $18.3 million, the amount of money we need from the state ed fund to operate the schools, and we divide it by a pupil count of 1642.87 to come up with that per pupil ed spending amount that Cheryl, you just mentioned of 11,139. Again, there are more details on the website, but this 1642 is not a count of real kids. The state will start with the kids that show up, but they will give different weights for different kinds of kids. So we know as a state that it costs more to educate high school students than it does elementary school students. So we get a little bit of a bump up for all the high school students. We get a bump up for kids who are living in poverty. We get a bump up for kids who are English language learners. We also see a little bit of an increase for students who are in a rural district, so population sparsity. This district doesn't get it, but the NMV district also gets a little bump up for kids who are in small schools, because small schools cost more to run than large schools. The other thing I'd say on this 1642 is it looks like we've lost 80 kids from the previous year. There's a lot of districts across the state that are showing losses there, and it's we think it's primarily due to a change in how we are counting kids in poverty. This is the first year that a lot of the COVID era extensions of benefits have expired, and so when I'm talking to my colleagues across the state, we're all seeing drops there, and we think it has to do with how poverty is counted. We then take this 11,139 per pupil spending amount, and that is divided by the dollar yield, which is a number that the legislature will set in either May or June of this year. And that's a number that is just, they're looking at the whole state, deciding how much money they need to raise to pay for all the ed spending across the state, and then they kind of back into what a tax rate would be. So per pupil spending divided by the yield gives us a district level tax rate. And again, the per pupil ed spending is the amount that we use to compare one district to another.
Why is the 24 budget per number of pupils so much lower?
Good question. So from 24 to 25 is the year that they changed basically how we count kids. So in the past, they used what was called equalized pupils for this number, and that's changed to long-term weighted average daily membership. That was a change in the legislature, Act 127, and it gave districts everywhere across the state a lot more kids. You'll see the yield numbers change pretty dramatically as well, and that's because we're counting, we got twice as many kids to raise roughly the same amount of money. They had to reduce the yield amount and give us less per kid.
So it's not actually more physical.
No, we did not
It's the
double
way
our
you
kid
count
counts. It's the way we count them, exactly. And it's those weights. We then take that district rate of $1.30, and that gets modified to apply to each of the town tax bills. So the state wants, basically wants everybody who's in the same value house to pay the same amount of taxes if they're in the same district. We know that in Richford, for example, they just reappraised their grand list 2 years ago. So their grand list is actually a lot more accurate compared to the fair market value of properties than Enosburg's, which has been two decades maybe since they've done a reappraisal. So that's done by what's called the Common Level of Appraisal, or the CLA. We will take that district tax rate for each town and divide it by their CLA. So Enosburg's, which has a less accurate grand list, their tax rate is actually going to go up to $1.4296. Richford's, which was just reappraised, their tax rate's going to go down to 96 cents. And it'll make a little more sense when we look at the next slide, which shows property values. So again, the state wants that district level tax rate to be applied fairly across all towns. They want a homestead in Enosburg that's assessed at 200,000 compared to a homestead in Richford that's assessed at 200,000. But they know that those houses aren't actually worth $200,000. In Enosburg this year, that $200,000 house on the fair market is actually about $303,000. That house in Richford, because it was just reappraised, is actually more accurate, and that's $205,000, $206,000. Go back to that one for a moment. And so the CLA is just trying to adjust the rate because it's applied to what's on your tax assessment. They're trying to make it fair for those two houses, and the person in Enosburg who's really in a $300,000 house should be paying more than somebody in a $200,000 house. This chart shows the actual tax rates that appear on your bills since FY20, which was the first year we operated as a unified district. And you can see here in between 23 and 24, that's when Richford reappraised. And so their CLA increased quite a bit and it dropped their tax rate. And that's because they were now paying on property that's not only more accurate, it's probably overvalued compared to what they could get.
What is CLA again? I'm sorry.
Common level of appraisal. So that's that measurement that the tax department gives us to say how accurate your grand list is to reality.
This might be a good time to acknowledge that Vermont has one of the most complex education funding systems in the country. It's very hard to, probably the world. It's very hard to understand, and I think it's even harder to try to communicate about it in an understandable way. So Morgan, could you go back to this? Did you have one more slide?
Yes.
Okay, let's finish his slides first.
So in this chart, and this is on the website as well, it will show what people in Enosburg and Richford will likely pay if this budget is passed and nothing changes in the legislature, which you know it will. What someone in Enosburg and what someone in Richford will pay if they pay based just on the value of their home. So in Enosburg, a $150,000 house, and that's what it's listed at. So really a house that's worth $225-ish is anticipated to pay $2,144 in education property tax with this budget. In Richford, that 150, it's only $1,453. On the other side, it will show you what you would pay if you're in that $150,000 assessed home, but you're paying based on your income. And there's a link from our website to the tax department where you can go in and plug your actual figures in there, both for your house value and your income, and get pretty close to exactly what you would likely pay. And so $150,000 home in Enosburg, if you're paying based on income, that's going to be $1,624, so less than the $2,144 that you'd be paying if you're not based on income. Again, in Richford, it's $1,453. Here, again, because that tax rate is lower, that's actually what you would pay if you were paying based on the property value alone. If your income level drops below that $80,000, you start to see a bit of a benefit compared to what you pay if you aren't income sensitized.
Could you talk about what they're going to see on the ballot and the connection to the lost pupils?
So there are two numbers that you see on the ballot. The first is that $25.2 million. That's the spending authority that we're asking you give the board. You're also going to see the 11,139, which we'll talk about in a moment, and that's the per pupil education spending, assuming this budget passes. You also see that percentage. It was 8.6%, which is the increase, 8.6%, thank you, which is the increase from, if you go back, the 1139 here compared to 10,253. This budget is actually only up about 6.5%, and the ed spending, which is the number that really drives the tax rate, is only up about 3.5%. The reason that the per pupil spending is going up is this loss that we mentioned of about 80 kids or 80 weighted kids from year to year.
If you sat through this and understood that, it would be helpful if you could communicate, help share that with your friends and neighbors. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what you were mentioning earlier about how our our weighted per pupil spending compares to the rest of the state. So each of these lines represents weighted per pupil spending for the year that we're in right now. So each of these represents a different district in the state of Vermont. So our lowest spending district is somewhere in the 8,000 range down here at the bottom. At the top is the highest spending. It's somewhere around 18,000 in weighted per pupil spending. So the district and the budget that we're in right now for Enosburg-Richford is right here. It's the 6th lowest spending in the state of Vermont based on weighted per pupil at 10,253. 4 of those districts below us don't operate schools. So we're really the 2nd lowest spending per pupil in the state of Vermont of all the districts that operate schools. Our partner, our other district in Franklin Northeast, Northern Mountain Valley, is a few spots ahead of you or above you at about the 11th lowest space. They're at 10,591. And I'm going to just say per pupil, but I mean weighted pupil. The red lines reflect our partners throughout Franklin County. The first black line here reflects the average per pupil spending in Franklin County, and the second black line represents the statewide average in per pupil spending. So you can see that, you know, we're trying to provide strong opportunities for students within the bounds of the budget that we can have the community be in favor of. So that has been a constraint on building budgets, but that's where we're at. And we're presenting a budget to you today that I do not think will result in us rising much, if at all, on that comparison data. So one of the things that we do in Franklin Northeast, because we are low spending, is we have people in our office. Heather is a great example. We're looking for other ways that we could fund opportunities for students. So we are often looking for competitive grants. One really great example is a green energy grant that we received for Richford Junior Senior High School. That grant total, it was actually 2 grants combined, brought in $310,000 to be able to replace the existing boiler and install pellet boilers. We got an estimate from Efficiency Vermont that we're expected to save around $66,000 annually in energy savings and up to $1.3 million over the course of 20 years. So not only Heather worked with Vern on writing that grant, we were able to do it. We wouldn't have been able to afford it without that competitive grant piece. And we're going to see long-term cost savings because of what we were able to do. We did an LED light project in every school across the supervisory unit except actually this one. We were not able to get that project for this school. That brought in about $111,000, almost $112,000. I don't have the actual data on what the long-term cost savings are on that, but I've requested that information. The other thing is, many of you probably know, we offer pretty vibrant after-school and summer programs for our students in Franklin Northeast, and I think there's a common belief that all schools do that, and it is actually not true. Only about 50% of the schools in Vermont offer after-school and summer programming, and we do have some money in our local budgets for after-school and summer programming, but we fund most of the programs through the competitive grants. So Heather, as I said, is a really savvy grant writer. The existing grant that we're under right now, our award amount was $578,833. And we were the only system in the state, let's see if I get this right. We did not have to reapply for this 5-year cycle, we were offered a pass-through, a what?
Renewability.
Okay, well, I've been calling it pass-through in the other 8 sessions, so a renewability grant where we didn't have to reapply, they gave it to us, and we score very well on our data measures for our after-school program.
Then can I just add, that's an annual number.
That's an annual number.
During the 5 years of the grant.
Perfect. So 2.5 plus million.
50 each year, or that's 5
That's
years.
578 per year for 5 years.
Right before we went to press on this, Heather actually was able to get a couple more grants. One of them, we had a grant at Bakersfield to fund their summer program, and that grant expired at the end of last year. And so we were scrambling a little bit to figure out how are we going to be able to navigate funding that program without the grant funding. And Heather was able to draw in another $232,000 for after school and summer programs. And that's over 42 months, I believe. So we'll be able to fund there as well. So those are some of the things that we do. These are just some examples. There are also several smaller grants that we go after as well.
One other article that will appear on the ballot is one looking for permission to take a quarter of the leftover money from the 23-24 school year and put it into a capital reserve fund. We've had a capital reserve fund here established for long before we were a merged district. We've got probably about $650,000 in that now. Some of that will go to finishing up the Richford Boiler project. This is one that you see every year. In the past, we've asked for half of it to go into the capital reserve fund, no matter what the number is. This year, the board decided to bring that down to a quarter and drive a little bit more money into buying down the tax rate for this year.
Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Do you want to ask a question first?
Yeah. Like most of the people are all, I'm old. And budgets that I like to look at a budget that has, this is the money we're gonna get and where we're getting it from, and this is what we're gonna spend it on. Is that someplace that a voter can look at?
Yes, those are on our website, and we've got some that are sort of the big picture. Here's what we're spending on instruction, here's what we're spending on special ed.
If I go on the website.
Yeah, and if you want to get down to the detail of this is how much we're spending on workers' comp for this person, you can get pretty close to that.
There's a link. I know you can't click. It's in your book, but it does say the link up here. And for those of you with a smartphone, there's also you could take a picture of the code and it'll bring you right there. Jared?
Go back to that same chart that we see every year about where we end up on the spending. Were you able to find out how the other school districts are performing in reading, math, and science scores?
I have not had time to do that yet, Jared.
Because I know some of these other school districts are spending 30%, 50% more than us, but are achieving the same results in reading, math, and science. Or in some instances, maybe even lower than us, then they're spending too much money. And it's not about just spending money. So I think that's the chart that we really should be looking at, is what results are they getting?
I think that there's a lot of those conversations that are happening at the state level when they're talking about the governor's plan. But one of the things I will say to that, though, is there's a happy medium place. I don't disagree that there are certain levels. I'm not suggesting that we should be trying to get voters to approve budgets that are $5,000 more per pupil. But there is a better place than where we're at, because one of the things that we are being negatively impacted by is that we have a hard time finding candidates to come work here in Franklin Northeast, because one, we're further away from where the housing is. We've really struggled over the last 5 years to find housing, and I think for those of you that are on our social media pages, you see that we'll sometimes put out a plea to the community. Does anybody have a rental? We've got someone that's just taken a job. We've lost a few candidates because they couldn't find affordable housing in the area. But there's also a place in your spending where you can get closer to right-sizing the salary piece. And if we could get there where we could stabilize some of the staffing, the most important factor is the quality of the teacher when it comes to student outcomes. And I do know from some of my colleagues, they start the year fully staffed, they have candidates, they're able to get there. I haven't done a comparison in terms of which line is theirs and, you know, what do their outcomes look like, but one of the things that people have asked a lot of questions about over the last couple of years is, why do we have instructional coaches at the system level? We have that because we're navigating a different time than what we had 10 years ago. So we can't afford to have them in each of our schools. And that's something that there are some schools that are able to afford a certain number of instructional coaches in each of their buildings. We can't do that. And we know if one principal advertises for an instructional coach, they're likely going to have to round up to a half-time or full-time to get one. And that might mean that 2 other buildings don't have any instructional coaching. So we have those contracts at our level and we can deploy those out. That's a really important strategy for us because we've got people that have had no pre-service training in education that are coming into education as a second career and are working in classrooms in front of kids while they're getting their license under an emergency or provisional license, but they're getting their training while they're teaching. So that part does matter in terms of being able to get to a place where we can have more competitive salary, where we can attract more candidates as well.
So what changed over 20, 25, 30 years to where you could have one teacher at the classroom of 20, 30 kids without any instructional coaches? And we had better results in reading, math, and science scores.
I think a lot has changed in 20 or 30 years.
Well, why did we let it?
Why did we let it? I think there are some societal changes that I think we have to acknowledge. I started teaching 30 years ago, Montgomery Elementary, just down the road, and I can remember having kids, the discrepancy of need was, maybe like this. And when I walk into a classroom now and I look at the discrepancy of need when kids enter, it is much more like this. And the other piece that's changed, to be completely frank with you, if a child wasn't coming to school regularly, we would make a report to DCF. DCF would get involved, parents would have to engage, and we'd create a plan so they were coming to school. We have seen significant shifts in their capacity. One, their system is flooded. They've changed their rules, so what they engage with is, the threshold is way up here. So all those things they used to support us with, they don't anymore. They can't. They don't have the staffing, they don't have the capacity, and it doesn't meet their current rules. We also had a mental health system where if a child was struggling, there was capacity. There isn't the same capacity now. I could put a child on a wait list, or a principal, assistant principal, could say there's a significant need here, they need therapeutic intervention. It could be 18 months in some cases. We also used to be able to say, okay, this child is really struggling. We've tried everything we can in the school, and there would be alternatives available. After COVID, all of those alternatives basically ceased to exist. The need of our students skyrocketed, and we had to figure it out because the hospital could say, well, maybe not the hospital, but mental health could say no space, alternative programs could say no space, schools couldn't say no space. So we built those alternative programs to be able to meet those kids where they were, to keep them in our public schools. So I would say that things have drastically changed in 20 years. We're doing our best to navigate it, but I'm not going to tell you that we own the reason why things change, because there's societal factors. Yeah. So I'm gonna navigate. I know you've been here a while. We fed you pizza, probably made you a little sleepy. We'll try to get through this last part, but. So Governor Scott has proposed a transformation plan for the education system in Vermont. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what exists now. This right here, this map of Vermont, all the different shapes represent either a supervisory union or a supervisory district. We're here. This is Franklin Northeast there. So remember, we're a supervisory union, but we have 2 districts that we operate. So in Vermont, throughout the state, there are 52 supervisory unions or supervisory districts. Within those supervisory unions and districts, there are 119 total districts.
There are 287 schools that we operate throughout Vermont, and we educate 83,733 publicly funded students. So in the governor's transformation plan, he is talking about completely transforming how we govern. So instead of having 52 supervisory unions or districts, in his proposal that shifts to 5. So we have these 5 regions, the Champlain Valley, Winooski Valley, Northeast region, Southwest and Southeast regions. Now that map has existed for quite some time, and that map was created by the Vermont Superintendents Association really for the sole purpose to tell superintendents like me, which monthly regional meeting do you go to? So that's my regional group. This dark green, I've for 8 years now, been working with 16 other superintendents in this dark green region. So under this proposal, they use the Vermont Superintendent region as the construct for the proposal. So we would be assigned to the Champlain Valley region, and there would be 34, almost 35,000 students in that region. In the 4 other regions, that ranges from 10,000 and some change to around 14,600. So there would be new school boards. Instead of having 52 school boards, or 119 school boards really, you would end up having 5 different school boards in the state. What's in his proposal right now is that each of these school boards, unless things have changed in the last 2 days, would have 5 members, and that would be proportional representation for the region. So they have not articulated how they'll do it yet, but each region would be divided into wards, and then there would be an election for school board representation from within each of those wards within the system. So 1 school board, 1 central office, 1 superintendent for each of those regions. Right now, our board members are basically volunteers. They get paid almost no money. It's 3 digits. It's not even 4 digits. I think it might be $750 a year. So they basically lose money in the gas money they spend traveling back and forth to meetings. In this model, those school board members would be elected part-time quasi-professional positions, so they would have a salary attached to their work. The scale of the work would be much larger than what it is.
And this is a kind of a chart of the timeline in the governor's proposal. And so like everything, this is going to go through the legislative process. And I know the timeline especially has gotten a lot of scrutiny. So this is the year that we're in. The legislature will pass a bill, and the agency will start working on the rules that they need to implement it. Next year, the year that we're voting a budget for now, the governor has said he's going to infuse $77 million to buy down tax rates further from what you saw, and then the AOE will still continue to work on that transition planning. They'll write the rules for school size and class size in this window. The following year, 26-27, those new districts would start to elect board members. They would build their first budget. They would start to hire their central office staff. The old districts would begin to shut down operations. And in this year, Enosburg, Richford, and all the current districts in the state wouldn't vote on a budget. The state would say, here's your budget, and the number that's out there currently in law is whatever we pass this year plus 3%. And that would be for everyone across the state. July 1, 2027, the new districts would start to operate those schools. So the old districts go away, and that Champlain Valley, Richford down to Shoreham district would run the school, the other 8 in our district, and all the ones here and there. We would also move to a new funding formula. So instead of the board setting a budget, the voters approving a budget, and the state giving us the money that's needed to support that budget, the state would say, we think you should have this much money per kid. Here you go, and you need to operate your budget within those confines. There will be some mechanism for voters to give authority to spend more money. They're still kind of sorting that out and sorting out where that money would come from. They would also be standing up school advisory councils. So these would be school level community groups that would have two functions. One is that they would control a very small part of the school level budget, so they could have some input there. And then they would also inform the continuous improvement
Yes.
plans. Getting a
Part
little
of our-
farther each day.
Yeah, you did great. To receive federal funding, we have to have, each school and our supervisory union has to have a continuous improvement plan. And that's just one of the requirements, the board has to approve it. So in this new model, that school advisory councils, that would be their authority to approve the continuous improvement plan for those schools.
Yep. And then in the out years, they would, they're saying rescale the school portfolio. So they're basically looking at those rules that they've put in place in terms of school size and class size and making decisions around the number of schools we operate in the state.
So I want to acknowledge that things are moving really fast during the legislative session. Morgan and I are actually kind of dividing up which committees we're watching each day to try to keep pace with what's happening. And I will say, the original plan that was released in the end of January, I think, timeline, this was the language that we saw in there. The governor's bill, there's a bill now that reflects the governor's plan, and that just came out on Tuesday. That is 176 pages. It's on Morgan's bag right there. So it's a lot of details that we're still unpacking. One of the things that has changed is they, in the bill, they were specific about class size. So they talk about shifting from wherever we are right now. Districts have their own class size policies, and there are some that are listed in our ed quality standards, to having a 1:15 ratio of teacher to student ratio in kindergarten through grade 3, and from grade 4 to grade 12, a 1:25 student to teacher ratio at the high school level. That's a pretty significant difference, especially at our high school level. We've done the math, we've looked at the numbers. Most of our classes meet that expectation in our elementary grades, but not as much in our high school. So they talk about those rules. If the bill is passed, this is our next school year, we would be expected to be at those class size minimums here, so a year and a half from now. And they're now, the language about closing some schools, they've changed how they're talking about that piece now. So really what this means is they're kind of creating the conditions that will happen, because you're going to have to meet your class size standards. You're going to have to meet your efficiency standards. So you're going to have to prove that you're financially viable, and you're going to have to be able to prove that you are meeting the education quality standards as well. And then when you get out into that 28, 29, the way the language reads now is that they will work with those districts about determining what they would need to rescale, depending on what those outcomes were. So this right now is in bill form. So what we know is that in order for a bill to become a law, it has to go through the House, the Senate, and the governor needs to sign it. It is unlikely, I think, that it would see no changes. There's a lot of discussion about all that's embedded in this, especially the number 5. There's a lot of discussion happening there. I will go out on a limb and say that I do think something will change significantly during this legislative session. I don't know what that will be. I think that taxpayers across Vermont last year sent a message to Montpelier when they voted down about 1/3 of the school budgets in the state. 33 districts were defeated last year during town meeting. Montpelier heard that message. The governor heard that message. Our legislators seem also motivated to make significant change in our education system and making transformation, but we don't know where we'll actually land. What I reported to you tonight is what's in the proposal, and we'll keep a close eye as we move forward. One thing that I have prepared is a community newsletter that has a little bit more information that should launch probably tomorrow morning. So that will be on our Facebook page and our website. If people want to come look for that, you'll see that there. And I'll try to produce some regular updates as we navigate this legislative process. Any final questions?
Yeah, where do the career centers fit into all this?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
So there are several pieces that, they're working on CTE centers, and what we're still waiting for more detail related to CTE centers, but what they've said to us is their idea around CTEs is to kind of take them away from districts. And at first they talked about making them one district. We're now hearing more along the lines of BOCES, which I don't know if I could describe. Can you describe a BOCES?
So it's a new concept in Vermont. A lot of other states have them. It's basically a sort of a private entity that all the districts join into to offer a service that is too expensive for them to do individually. So in New York State, a lot of the special education comes from a BOCES, and several districts will get together and basically hire them to do special education or tech ed or probably maybe transportation in some cases. We have a recent law in Vermont that allows them. No one has tried to create one yet.
We have one in the South that had one before the law.
BOCES. It stands for Board of Cooperative Education Services. And so in terms of the CTE plan that they've put forward, not really sure if it would look more like a district or more like a BOCES where we'd all have some input on a board, but it would be a separate entity that would run all 12 tech centers in the state? 14?
I think it's more than that, yeah.
All 14 tech centers in the state?
All of them, whatever that number
The
is.
facility would still stay in Enosburg, and the other facility at BFA.
That wouldn't be up to us to decide.
Sounds to taking away any control over towns and their schools.
Yeah, if this were to pass, this would go live on July 1, 2027. Let's just say it passes the way it does. On that day, the new district would be transferred all property, all debt, all assets, everything would be transferred to those new districts. The CTE is a little harder because we don't have all the details about what they're going to do with it. One of the things that I know that they're having conversations about is what you do with the property piece of it and how does that work. Some of the CTE centers are actually embedded in high schools, and we have very different models around the state, so they need to figure that part out. Pre-K is not in their plan. That is something that they have to figure out, and special education is also not. When they've done all of their modeling for the budget, we're still trying to figure out, we're trying to take their model and figure out how we can apply it here to see how we would be impacted. And our first thought is that this should improve things for us, and the modeling isn't really working that way yet, but Morgan is smartest CFO in the state, I'm convinced of it. He's gonna figure that part out. But some of those things are not factored in. So it sounds like from testimony that I saw today, and I think it was a couple of days old, Secretary Saunders answered about special education, and the way she described that would be more of like a categorical aid, and they pushed on what percentage, because right now it's around 50, and she talked about 100%, but I don't really understand yet what they're doing with that. Yes.
You gave a wonderful presentation on what you're doing with our schools. Is your capacity to do that or improve on that going to get better or worse under this, or you can't tell yet? That's one way to put the question. And how is it going to, another way is, how is it going to affect the kids and the teachers?
Yeah. The kids and the teachers.
So,
Are those two questions at all discussed?
yes, we're asking those questions too.
You're not making the decision.
Right, but we're asking them to show us how this gets to better quality. Like, those are the details and the pieces that, Morgan has a leadership position at the BASBO, the business officials, and I have a leadership position for superintendent. So we're both in regular meetings about that, and these are questions that we're asking consistently. For teachers, it's going to mean much larger class sizes than some of them are used to. But it also, they're trying to attend to, so if you go back to the visual, so they're going to be on one more. This would be one collective bargaining agreement, would be the intention. We are low comparatively in the state. We're not the lowest, but we're low. And some of the highest teacher wages are within this dark green area for the state. So that would increase teacher compensation in theory. So there's that piece of it. But a lot of the details they keep talking about the quality measures. We'll work through that.
Doesn't this plan essentially end school choice in Vermont as we know it?
No,
I mean, it's being presented as school choice, but it's the school that we choose for you.
so that I think is gonna shift a lot in the next couple of weeks, but the way that I understand the governor's plan is within this district, this board would have to designate at least one school a school choice school. They could designate more. The AOE has an approval process that they would go through that seems to probably reduce the number across the state to maybe a dozen that would qualify.
So again, it's the school that we choose for you though.
It would be the schools that board chooses, so you would not be able to choose to go outside of those borders, like in Montgomery we do in St. Johnsbury or Quebec or Alberta or Massachusetts,
Tokyo.
Rhode Island. I think that's gonna change, but we haven't really seen a lot of details or a lot of testimony on that yet. But what it's doing is it's reducing the number of schools that you can choose, but it's offering that school choice to everybody across the state.
Based on lottery.
It would be based on a lottery if you had more kids apply than you have slots for. So the board would be able to say, we're not gonna let more than 10% of the kids enter that lottery.
And I think they would have to have at least 51% of the students attending that school that were publicly funded.
Yeah, Lynn, roughly on the dark green, the very bottom, what is that, Middlebury area?
That's all the way down to, so it's all of Franklin, all of Grand Isle, all of Chittenden County. And it's about 2/3 of Addison County, so it goes all the way down to Shoreham.
Sure.
Yeah. Is that the most south?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay, so why is Scott trying to do this when the rest of the country is in chaos? That's a question for him, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a chicken and the egg. Like, we've been in a little bit of chaos around education funding for more than just the moment we're in. So I think that there is a response. I will say, and I'm just speaking for myself, we do need to think about scale differently in Vermont. We're operating some districts that are very, very small districts, meaning they have their own central office and under 100 students. And we're also operating some schools that are very, very small. I testified last year in, I think it was House Education, and I had done a little research before that testimony and said, how many schools are under 100, under 50, under 25, and there are a lot. And there were around, I think, 75 at that point. And I'm not weighing in on what's the right size school, but if we're thinking about making sure that there is a quality piece, one of the things that one of my colleagues in the Champlain Valley region did was they took course of study books and compared it across several schools and looked at what do students, down here in this part of the Champlain Valley have access to because of the scale. And then they compared it to, Enosburg was one of the ones that they compared it to, and then their system. And there comes a point where we're all tied to our local schools, and there's the emotional piece of being tied to your local school. But at the same time, we can't fund schools where we have 2 or 3 or 5 students in a class and still offer the right number of opportunities and have the scale. So they're looking at that class size and they're looking at that school size.
And I'll say, just to add on to that, when Scott was in the Senate, he was proposing reducing the number of districts down pretty dramatically. So it's not new to him, this idea. Last session, the House, which was heavily Democratic, was trying to push through a similar funding formula to what he's proposing. So it's something that is really shared by 46 other states. So that's not, it feels new to us, but it's been already through the legislative process a little bit, and it's something that most people in the country see in one form or another.
I just can remember at the time when Richford and Enosburg, there was a supervisory school that was out there for the voters, both towns, to vote on. They turned it down.
I was in high school when that happened.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was working here. But fast forward, and what do each one of the communities do? They spend millions of dollars to build beautiful schools. And now, what are you gonna do with those schools? You know?
The transportation issue would be amazing.
And that too.
You'd have to, for 25 in a class, you've got to get all those 25 kids in that class. And then you can't shoot them in hydro tubes. One image I have is, you know,
Well,
the stores with the hydro tubes. Get
So
that student over there.
You just made the point of how even though they're not saying school closure, they're going to create the conditions where you're going to have to put some schools together
Yeah.
to be able to get to that scale.
Yeah.
I mean, on paper, we'll be part of Chittenden County, Shelburne, you name it, but geographically, nothing has changed. Do you still see us sharing more resources that maybe are down to Shelburne and Charlotte? You think they're gonna make their way up to Richford and Enosburg and stuff?
Well, I mean, I will tell you,
On paper.
I'm gonna promise you right now, if it's 5, I'll be retiring in 2027 if that happens. I'm not interested in trying to lead a system that large. I think that 35,000 in the state of Vermont is a lot. But what I will say is, I don't think anybody's saying that we're gonna be moving kids that distance. They're going to be structuring the central office very differently than how we structure our central office. So you'll end up with a superintendent who basically never goes into schools or sees kids. They won't be able to. They're gonna be managing the district, and then you'll have assistant superintendents and you'll have curriculum leaders and different levels as they're describing really vibrant central offices. But I do think one thing I will say is that there was compelling testimony last week in Senate Education where one of the superintendents, they had presented, here's what this, they're calling it the EB model, would mean to my school. And so they were talking about how many cuts they would need to make in their school. And as they were presenting how many cuts, they were naming how many of those positions they had and how many students. And if you looked at the proportion of those compared to where we are, it's vastly different. There are a lot more professional positions in some of those. So, whoever is leading here, whoever that board is going to have to look at, there's an equity, I can't remember what it's called. There's one piece of this where that board's going to have to prove that they're equitably distributing those resources. And right now, if we just took it the way it was, they wouldn't be able to prove that if they didn't move anything or adjust anything. Does that make sense?
To me.
Why does Burlington High School, who's gonna have a brand new school by 2027, wanna be with us?
Well, I don't think anybody has volunteered for this. But there's a lot to talk about in this, and there are certainly opportunities. Talk to your legislators,
Well, a
follow the
friend
process.
told me that she pays $14,000 in taxes because of the new building. She lives right by the lake. And I've been to her house, and if it was in Enosburg, it wouldn't be a $300,000 house. So it's just where you are, I guess.
Right.
But I was really amazed, shocked, when she told me she paid $14,000
Right.
in taxes.
Yeah, sorry, Jim.
So a couple of things come to mind as I hear about having to have a 1 to 25 student to teacher ratio. There would be some classes, probably some upper level science and math classes, at Enosburg or Richford that would not have enough kids to meet that minimum number.
Right.
I can't imagine that there would be hard-coded into a system the inability for a student to take, I'll just grab an example, like an advanced anatomy and physiology class that's on the college prep level. All right, so if there's a high school that doesn't have enough kids to meet that minimum number, is there gonna be some provision added for them to go to a neighboring school system to take that class?
Well, that's right, but
Or
that's-
something similar? Like, you know, if Enosburg doesn't have that class, does MVU have it? And kids from Highgate and Swan and Enosburg and wherever, you know, maybe even St. Albans go up to that school
Yeah.
instead?
That's such a good question, and those are some of the questions that we've all been thinking about is,
So you
I'm
haven't
even-
heard that, has it not gone down to that level of
it's not
detail
gone down to
yet?
that level of detail, but in reality, all those schools would be in the same district. So right now, we're working to make sure that kids could access classes between our two high schools, whether that is in person or could they virtually or join or do it hybrid. So there are other options and there are ways that we also, I can never remember the name of it, courseware. We have courseware where kids could take some of those higher level courses just in a more flexible, different pathway than a traditional sit in the class. One piece of language that I got yesterday was that they're talking average. So we would need to work to get to average. And I don't know if 25 is going to be a hard and fast rule for every content area, or if there might be some content areas that would be more or less than that. That number really just came into play for certain on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So, but I'm paying attention to those, and as I give updates, I'll try to add in the details that are coming.
Have you heard anything today? 'Cause
I heard a lot today.
yesterday, the House Majority Leader said we will not fix education this year.
Meaning that they won't do anything?
No, said we'll probably tackle class size, but everything else is too much for this year.
So I think we're hearing a lot of that, like that, I think that there's been frustration that's been brewing because the idea, the proposal was released at the end of January, but there was no bill that came until this Tuesday. So it hasn't left the legislators with much time to really consider the most complex education transformation that Vermont's ever faced.
He's written a bill,
Well, he hasn't personally, but legislative council has written.
and that new superintendent that the one who's in
Uh,
charge of,
The Secretary of Education.
that's it, is she officially the Secretary of Education? Because for a while she was just like interim or something.
That's also a hard
That's
question. We are referring to her as Secretary Saunders.
We
I
are.
don't know,
Yeah.
there was, I think, a court decision. I'm not clear
Yeah.
myself if there still has to be a Senate
I shouldn't bring
confirmation.
these things up, yeah,
So-
that's fine. I mean, there's lots to think about.
You all, I have to say, have asked the best questions. This is our ninth night, and this is the best question, so no offense to the other communities, right?
Well, one more question, the 25 kids minimum. I've been in some of the classrooms. In fact, I subbed in science for a month in January, and I had 18 kids. And I lack for elbow room in that science room.
Yeah.
And when you get kids close enough where they can touch elbows, that's never a good thing.
So that's the piece about scale, right? Because the other part of the legislation that they have to consider is school construction aid. Because if they're going to work to get to scale, you can't, there are some places that won't be able to fit the 25. Before this week, we were hearing minimum school sizes. That isn't in the bill, I was expecting it, but we were hearing elementary schools of 450 and high schools of 600 to 700, somewhere in that range. But I think that they have figured out that you couldn't get to that scale without a lot of construction aid to make that happen. So I think we're going to see incremental steps towards reaching scale.
All the construction.
Well, like
is
you'd
going
have to
vertical.
go to a different place for a science class with 25 in it. You'd need a bit special big room with,
Yeah.
and even have 2 teachers, because if you're doing experiments, 25 people.
Right, you need
Well, but then
six,
that would be 1 to 12 and a half.
Yes.
They're saying 1 teacher to 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't imagine being a science teacher. Well, I don't even know. Do they do it now? Are there science teachers that teach 25, say in the
No.
chemist?
Not here.
I haven't.
Not
You
here.
know, with your Bunsen burners and all that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know,
I'm just.
they were still connected.
But as you said, this is just a starting point.
Yes.
Probably most everything will change in
Yes.
this plan.
Yes.
That's a good point.
It seems for people who don't have anything better to do, it seems that the House Education Committee is the one that's doing the most of the bulk of the work on this bill, so that's the one to watch.
I do think that they have strong interest. I know, Jared, I didn't see the press conference or that article today. I knew they had a press conference yesterday, but I think the other thing they're really trying to figure out what's the number. I think people are quickly getting to the place that no one's going to support 5, but what's the number? And people have talked about 12, or counties or tech center districts, or I've even heard like the senatorial districts, and there are all kinds of numbers being thrown out. So I think my guess is they're gonna still try the funding formula shift and the class size.
Yeah, I had heard that they wanted to get the lines drawn and the funding formula set. And what she might be referring to is that none of this is gonna change next year's. But I think there's a lot of interest in getting something on paper and voted.
Yeah.
But it goes through a long process there.
On a state level, how does potential federal funding impact any of this?
It's a great question because it changes, for us, we actually benefit from our high poverty numbers in terms of what we draw in, and we would be, I don't know how exactly they would distribute it, but it would go to the district instead of, and then from there, I think there'll be rules around that.
The other question that I've been asking and haven't really gotten an answer, in order for us to get Title I funding, we have to show that all of our schools are relatively close to each other in terms of how much local funds we put in there, because they want to prevent us from shorting a school with local funds if they're high poverty because they're getting Title I money. That's challenging to do in just our 6 towns up here, which are all relatively the same. If you're now having to compare our 6 towns with Chittenden County and Addison County where the spending levels are a lot higher, it either puts that funding at risk or it's going to require some pretty quick, pretty radical changes in how much money is being spent in those schools.
Could we potentially see our funding level, our spending level go higher up here to equal out with Shelburne and Burlington?
That's kind of how averages work, right?
So I recognize that it's late. We're willing to stay if anybody has any additional questions, but I want to thank you all for coming. If you are interested in voting early, you could go do that at your town clerks. If not, I hope you will head to the polls on Tuesday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.